Question 1. During a training session, a dog reacts with fearful body language, ears back, tail tucked, crouching, and attempts to avoid the trainer's actions. What would be the most appropriate action to take in this situation, considering the principles of positive reinforcement and ethical training practices? A. Continue with the training session and use positive punishment to correct the dog's behavior. B. Ignore the dog's fearful body language and proceed with the training, focusing on the task at hand. C. Immediately stop the session, create positive experience, and use positive reinforcement to reward calm behavior. D. Use choke chain or prong collar to assert control over the dog's movements. Answer. C. Immediately stop the session, create a positive experience, and use positive reinforcement to reward calm behavior. Explanation. Fearful body language is an indication of stress or discomfort which can lead to the dog associating the training environment with negative experiences. According to ethical training practices and positive reinforcement principles, the trainer should stop the session to avoid further stress and help the dog recover. Creating a positive experience by rewarding calm behavior helps to reinforce a more desirable emotional state and fosters trust between the dog and trainer. Continuing with the session or applying punishment may worsen the dog's fear and hinder progress. The use of aversive training methods like choke chains or prong collars is discouraged due to their potential to cause harm and anxiety. Question 2. Which of the following scenarios best illustrates the concept of functional assessment in behavior modification plans for problem behaviors in dogs? A dog consistently barks at the door every time a visitor arrives. The trainer tries various techniques such as ignoring the barking, giving a treat when the dog remains quiet, and asking the owner to engage the dog with a toy before visitors arrive. B. A dog pulls on the leash while walking and the trainer immediately uses a pinch collar to correct the pulling behavior. C. A dog shows aggression when left alone and the trainer schedules punishment-based interventions, ignoring the underlying causes of the behavior. D. A dog jumps up on guests as a greeting and the trainer rewards the dog with treats for staying calm but ignores the dog's body language during the interaction. Answer A. A dog consistently barks at the door every time a visitor arrives. The trainer tries various techniques such as ignoring the barking, giving a treat when the dog remains quiet, and asking the owner to engage the dog with a toy before visitors arrive. Explanation. A functional assessment involves analyzing the dog's behavior by identifying the antecedents, triggers, and consequences, reinforcers that maintain the behavior. This assessment creates targeted behavior modification strategies. In the example above, the trainer is looking for patterns in the dog's behavior, barking at visitors, and testing different interventions to address the behavior in a thoughtful and non-aversive way. It requires careful observation and evaluation, which is central to creating a successful behavior modification plan. Using punishment-based methods without understanding the cause of the behavior is ineffective and exacerbate the issue. The trainer must instead focus on reinforcing desired behaviors like calmness around guests. Question 3. Scenario-based. Mr. Johnson recently adopted a dog, Baxter, who has a history of resource guarding with food. During a training session, Baxter becomes defensive and growls when Mr. Johnson approaches his food bowl. How should Mr. Johnson proceed, considering Baxter's behavior and the principles of desensitization and counter-conditioning? A. Mr. Johnson should immediately take away Baxter's food and correct him for growling to prevent this behavior from continuing. B. Mr. Johnson should increase the distance between himself and Baxter while gradually moving closer to the food bowl over time, rewarding Baxter for calm behavior during the process. C. Mr. Johnson should ignore Baxter's growling, continue to approach the food bowl, and allow Baxter to guard it until he stops. Mr. Johnson should feed Baxter from his hand every time to prevent the dog from guarding the food bowl. Answer. B. Mr. Johnson should increase the distance between himself and Baxter while gradually moving closer to the food bowl over time, rewarding Baxter for calm behavior during the process. Explanation. In this scenario, the appropriate approach is to apply the principles of desensitization and counter-conditioning. Desensitization involves gradually exposing the dog to a feared stimulus, in this case, Mr. Johnson approaching the food bowl. The dog can tolerate, and counter-conditioning helps change the dog's emotional response to the stimulus by pairing it with something positive, such as rewards. By slowly increasing proximity to the food bowl and rewarding calm behavior, Mr. Johnson is helping Baxter associate the approach with positive outcomes, ultimately reducing the resource-guarding behavior. Simply taking away the food or feeding Baxter from the hand does not address the underlying fear, aggression, and may worsen the behavior in the long run. Question 4. During a group class, a dog consistently pulls on the leash and the trainer notices that the dog becomes more frustrated when corrections are applied. Based on the principles of operant conditioning, which of the following would be the most effective approach to reduce the pulling behavior? They apply continuous positive punishment each time the dog pulls on the leash. B. Reinforce calm walking by rewarding the dog when it is walking on a loose leash and ignore pulling behavior. C. Use a prong collar to prevent the pulling behavior immediately. D. Increase the duration of the walks to tire the dog out and reduce pulling. Answer: B. Reinforce calm walking by rewarding the dog when it is walking on a loose leash and ignore pulling behavior. Explanation: the most effective method to address leash pulling is positive reinforcement of desired behaviors. According to operant conditioning, reinforcing calm walking by rewarding the dog with treats, praise, or toys when it is walking on a loose leash helps to increase the likelihood of the behavior occurring again. Ignoring the behavior prevents reinforcing it, which is a more effective approach than applying corrections or punishment. Applying positive punishment, e.g. leash jerks or aversive tools like prong collars, may escalate the dog's frustration and stress, making the behavior worse. Increasing the duration of walks does not directly address the root cause of pulling and may inadvertently reinforce undesirable behaviors. Question 5. When dealing with a dog that has separation anxiety, which of the following strategies is most consistent with the principles of behavior modification? A. Punish the dog for destructive behavior when left alone and give it no attention when it calms down. B. Increase the dog's anxiety by leaving it alone for longer periods each day until it becomes accustomed to being alone. C. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning by gradually increasing the time the dog is left alone while rewarding calm behavior. D. Leave the dog with a high-value chew toy to distract it from its anxiety while addressing the root cause. Answer: C. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning by gradually increasing the time the dog is left alone while rewarding calm behavior. Explanation: separation anxiety requires a thoughtful approach to reduce the dog's emotional distress. Desensitization and counter-conditioning are proven techniques for addressing separation anxiety. Desensitization involves gradually increasing the duration of time the dog is left alone, while counter-conditioning focuses on rewarding the dog for calm behavior. This combination helps the dog associate being alone with positive experiences rather than anxiety. Punishing the dog for destructive behavior or increasing anxiety by leaving it alone for longer periods without addressing the cause can worsen the problem. Simply distracting the dog with chew toy may not address the emotional roots of separation anxiety and may not lead to long-term improvement. Question 6. Scenario-based. Ms. Thompson has a 2-year-old Labrador Retriever named Max who frequently jumps up on guests when they enter the house. She has tried pushing Max down when he jumps, but this has not been effective. What would be the most appropriate strategy for Ms. Thompson to take based on principles of positive reinforcement and training consistency? A. Continue to push Max down when he jumps on guests to assert dominance, but also try rewarding him when he remains seated. B. Ignore Max's jumping behavior and only reward him when he sits calmly without giving attention to jumping. C. Allow Max to jump as much as he wants and only reward him when he sits down, assuming he will outgrow the behavior. D. Use shock collar to prevent Max from jumping on guests when they arrive. Answer: B. Ignore Max's jumping behavior and only reward him when he sits calmly without giving attention to jumping. Explanation: the key to addressing jumping behavior is reinforcing the opposite behavior, sitting calmly while completely ignoring the undesired behavior, jumping. In this case, ignoring Max when he jumps and rewarding him only when he remains calm will teach him that calm behavior is more rewarding than jumping. Pushing the dog or using shock collar introduces negative or aversive techniques which are less effective and may lead to increased anxiety or confusion. Ignoring the jumping and rewarding calmness creates clear and consistent feedback for the dog. Over time, Max will learn that sitting calmly is the most beneficial behavior. Question 7. A dog trainer is working with a dog that has a history of aggressive behavior towards other dogs when on walks. The trainer uses counter-conditioning by associating the presence of other dogs with positive rewards like treats and praise. Over time, the dog begins to show less reactivity. What principle of learning theory is the trainer applying in this scenario? A. Positive reinforcement. B. Operant conditioning. C. Classical conditioning. D. Social learning theory. Answer: C. Classical conditioning. Explanation. In this scenario, the trainer is using classical conditioning by associating a previously neutral stimulus, the presence of other dogs, with a positive reinforcement, treats and praise. Classical conditioning involves forming associations between an unconditioned stimulus, something that naturally elicits a response, and a conditioned stimulus, something that initially does not elicit a response but eventually does. Association. By pairing the presence of other dogs with positive experiences, the dog's emotional response to seeing other dogs is gradually changed, making it less reactive. This approach is different from operant conditioning, which focuses on reinforcing or punishing behaviors based on their consequences. Positive reinforcement is too often used within both operant and classical conditioning. Question 8. Which of the following is an example of negative reinforcement in dog training? A. Rewarding a dog with a treat when it sits calmly during a thunderstorm. B. Stopping an unpleasant noise when the dog stops barking at the door. C. Giving a dog a toy for playing quietly in its crate. D. Verbally scolding a dog when it jumps on the furniture. Answer. B. Stopping an unpleasant noise when the dog stops barking at the door. Explanation. Negative reinforcement occurs when a behavior is followed by the removal of an aversive stimulus, increasing the likelihood of the behavior being repeated. In this case, stopping the unpleasant noise and aversive stimulus when the dog stops barking is an example of negative reinforcement. The dog learns that stopping barking leads to the removal of the unpleasant, making it more likely to stop barking in the future. Positive reinforcement, on the other hand, involves adding a pleasant stimulus like a treat or toy to increase a desired behavior. Scolding a dog involves positive punishment, which is a form of aversive consequence rather than reinforcement. Question 9. A dog trainer is observing a dog that has been given a toy as a reinforcer during training. Over time, the dog begins to lose interest in the toy. What could be the most likely reason for this according to motivational theory? A. The toy is being used as a primary reinforcer, which the dog has become satiated with. B. The dog is not capable of associating the toy with positive reinforcement. C. The dog's intrinsic motivation for the toy has decreased because it is not being reinforced consistently. D. The toy has become secondary reinforcer and is no longer motivating for the dog. Answer. A. The toy is being used as a primary reinforcer, which the dog has become satiated with. Explanation. According to motivational theory, a primary reinforcer is one that is naturally rewarding, such as food or a favorite toy. However, when a primary reinforcer is overused, the dog may become satiated, meaning the reinforcer no longer holds the same value or motivation. This decrease in interest is a common issue when the primary reinforcer is used too frequently without variation. To maintain motivation, trainers should rotate reinforcers or introduce new stimuli. Secondary reinforcers, like praise or toys, may need to be paired with primary reinforcers to maintain their effectiveness. Question 10. A dog begins to associate the sound of a can opener with being fed dinner. Initially, the sound of the can opener did not cause any reaction, but now the dog begins to salivate when it hears it. This is an example of which principle of learning theory? A. Operant conditioning. B. Classical conditioning. C. Observational learning. D. Insight learning. Answer. B. Classical conditioning. Explanation. This scenario demonstrates classical conditioning, where the dog forms an association between a neutral stimulus, the sound of the can opener, and an unconditioned stimulus, the food, leading to a conditioned response, salivation. The can opener, initially a neutral stimulus, becomes a conditioned stimulus after being paired repeatedly with food, which naturally elicits salivation. This association leads to the dog salivating at the sound of the can opener, even without the presence of food. Question 11. A dog trainer uses a clicker to mark the desired behavior, followed by a treat as reinforcement. This technique is an example of which training method? A. Positive punishment. B. Negative reinforcement. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Classical conditioning. Answer. C. Positive reinforcement. Explanation. The clicker technique used in this example is a form of positive reinforcement. The clicker is a tool to mark the desired behavior precisely, and the treat that follows serves as a reinforcer. Positive reinforcement involves adding a pleasant stimulus such as a treat or praise to increase the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. The clicker is used as a bridge to communicate to the exactly when it has performed the correct behavior, making the reinforcement more effective. Question 12. A dog has learned to sit and receive a treat as a reward. The trainer then introduces the command down and rewards the dog with treat for lying down. Over time, the dog begins to sit when it hears the down command. This is an example of which concept in learning theory? A. Stimulus generalization. B. Extinction. C. Stimulus discrimination. D. Shaping. Answer A. Stimulus generalization. Explanation. This is an example of stimulus generalization where the dog begins to respond to a new stimulus, the down command, in the same way it responded to a similar stimulus, the sit command. Stimulus generalization occurs when an animal or human reacts in a similar manner to stimuli that are similar to the original conditioned stimulus. The dog has generalized its response from the sit to down, likely because of similarities in the verbal cues or context. Question 13, scenario-based. A dog becomes excited and starts to bark whenever it hears a specific doorbell sound. The dog has not been trained to react in this way. Which of the following best explains the dog's behavior? A. The dog is demonstrating an unconditioned response. B. The dog is shown an operant conditioning response. C. The dog's behavior is a result of classical conditioning. D. The dog is displaying an instinctive behavior. Answer. C. The dog's behavior is a result of classical conditioning. Explanation. The dog's behavior is a result of classical conditioning. In this case, the doorbell sound, initially neutral stimulus, has become associated with the arrival of visitor or some other event that elicits excitement and unconditioned stimulus. Over time, the dog has learned to respond to the doorbell sound with barking and excitement, which is now conditioned response. Classical conditioning involves pairing neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to produce conditioned response. Question 14. A dog trainer reinforces a dog for sitting quietly in a crate for 10 seconds, then gradually increases the duration of time before reinforcement is given. This is an example of which training method? A. Shaping. B. Operant conditioning. C. Classical conditioning. D. Extinction. Answer A. Shaping. Explanation. This is an example of shaping, a method of operant conditioning where successive approximations of a desired behavior are reinforced. In shaping, the trainer gradually reinforces behaviors that are closer to the target behavior by reinforcing the dog for sitting quietly for 10 seconds and then gradually increasing the duration. The trainer is using shaping to reinforce progressively longer periods of calm behavior. In the crate, shaping is effective for teaching complex behaviors or behaviors that do not occur naturally. Question 15. A dog has been trained to fetch a ball on command. The trainer now introduces a second ball and the dog learns to fetch it as well when asked. Over time, the dog begins to retrieve both balls simultaneously. What principle of learning theory is demonstrated here? A. Classical conditioning. B. Stimulus discrimination. C. Stimulus generalization. D. Operant conditioning. Answer. C. Stimulus generalization. Explanation. This scenario demonstrates stimulus generalization where the dog extends its learned response, fetching the ball, to a similar stimulus, the second ball, initially trained with one ball. The dog now generalizes the behavior to the new similar stimulus, the second ball. Stimulus generalization occurs when an animal performs the same behavior in response to a stimulus that is similar but identical to the original stimulus. Question 16. A dog trainer uses a leash to guide a dog into the correct position, then rewards the dog once it assumes the correct posture. What training method is this an example of? A. Positive punishment. B. Law of reward training. C. Negative reinforcement. D. Classical conditioning. Answer. B. Law and reward training. Explanation. This is an example of law and reward training. In this method, the trainer uses a law, in this case the leash, to guide the dog into the desired behavior or position. Once the dog has assumed the correct posture, the trainer rewards the dog with positive reinforcement, such as a treat or praise. This technique helps to shape behavior by using the law to guide the dog to the correct response, reinforcing it as soon as the correct behavior occurs. Question 17, scenario-based. Mr. Thompson is training his dog to stop jumping on people. He consistently uses a verbal cue off and gently redirects his dog to sit when it jumps up. He also rewards the dog with a treat once it sits calmly. However, the dog continues to jump on guests. What steps should Mr. Thompson take to improve the training? A. Use positive punishment to correct the jumping behavior. B. Increase the intensity of the verbal cue to make it clearer. C. Ensure consistency in applying the verbal cue and reward system. D. Ignore the behavior and hope it diminishes over time. Answer. C. Ensure consistency in applying the verbal cue and reward system. Explanation. The most effective step for Mr. Thompson is to ensure consistency in applying the verbal cue and reward system. Training requires A consistent approach, so the dog clearly understands what is expected. If the verbal cue, waff, and redirection are not consistently applied, the dog may become confused and continue jumping. Rewarding the dog with treats after sits calmly reinforces the desired behavior. Consistency in reinforcement and training techniques is crucial for success in modifying behaviors. Question 18. A dog starts to exhibit aggressive behavior towards other dogs during walks. The trainer begins desensitization by gradually exposing the dog to other dogs at a distance where it does not show aggression and slowly decreases the distance over time. What training method is being used here? A. Punishment-based training. B. Desensitization and counter-conditioning. C. Classical conditioning. D. Positive reinforcement training. Answer: B. Desensitization and counter-conditioning. Explanation: the method being used here is desensitization and counter-conditioning. Desensitization involves gradually exposing the dog to the stimulus, in this case other dogs, at a low intensity to help the dog tolerate it. Over time, the intensity is increased, leading to a reduced response aggression. Counter-conditioning works by pairing the exposure to the stimulus with a positive reward, such as treats, changing the dog's emotional response from negative aggression to positive calm behavior. Question 19. A dog is trained to stay on command. Over time, the dog begins to stay in different locations, including new environments and during distractions. What concept in behavior modification explains this ability? A. Stimulus generalization. B. Extinction. C. Discrimination. D. Shaping. Answer: A. Stimulus generalization. Explanation: this is an example of stimulus generalization. The dog has generalized the stay command to new environments and situations, meaning a response to the cue not only in familiar places, but also in different contexts. Stimulus generalization occurs when a learned behavior is extended to new stimuli that are similar to the original one. In this case, the dog applies the same behavior in various locations and environments, demonstrating the flexibility of the learned behavior. Question 20. A dog trainer uses a clicker to mark the exact moment a dog performs the desired behavior, followed immediately by a treat as reinforcement. This method is an example of which principle in operant conditioning? A. Positive punishment. B. Shaping. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Negative reinforcement. Answer: C. Positive reinforcement. Explanation: this is an example of positive reinforcement. In operant conditioning, positive reinforcement occurs when a desirable behavior is followed by a rewarding stimulus such as a treat. The clicker acts as a precise marker to signal to the dog exactly when the correct behavior has occurred, making the reinforcement more effective. By consistently rewarding the dog for performing the desired behavior, trainer increases the likelihood that the behavior will be repeated. Question 21. During a training session, a dog begins to whine. Whenever the trainer attempts to use a leash correction, the dog is showing signs of fear and stress. What would be the most appropriate course of action for the trainer? A. Continue using the leash correction to ensure the dog learns the lesson. B. Switch to using only positive reinforcement techniques. C. Increase the frequency of corrections to make the dog stop whining. D. Ignore the behavior and continue with the session as planned. Answer: B. Switch to using only positive reinforcement techniques. Explanation: the most appropriate course of action is to switch to using only positive reinforcement techniques. The dog is showing signs of stress and fear, which indicates that the current approach using a leash correction may be causing anxiety. Positive reinforcement is a more humane approach that can help reduce stress and fear while teaching the dog the desired behavior. Using negative stimuli, rewarding the dog for the desired behavior will lead to more effective and lasting results, while also ensuring the dog's well-being. Question 22, scenario-based. Mr. Williams is trying to stop his dog Max from barking excessively when the doorbell rings. Max has been trained to go to his bed and lie down when the doorbell rings. However, Max continues to bark, even when asked to go to his bed. What is the most effective next step in this training process? A. Use a shock collar to immediately stop the barking behavior. B. Increase the frequency of verbal commands to stop barking. C. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning to reduce the emotional response to the doorbell. D. Ignore the behavior and wait for Max to stop barking on his own. Answer: C. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning to reduce the emotional response to the doorbell. Explanation: The most effective approach is desensitization and counter-conditioning. Max is likely reacting to the doorbell with excitement or anxiety, causing him to bark. By gradually desensitizing him to the sound of the doorbell, playing a recording at a low volume, and rewarding calm behavior, and counter-conditioning, associating the doorbell. Positive reinforcement, like treats, you can modify his emotional response to the trigger, reducing the barking behavior over time. This approach helps to address the root cause of the behavior rather than just trying to suppress it. Question 23. In training a dog to walk politely on a leash, the trainer rewards the dog for walking at the trainer's side without pulling. The dog initially takes several steps at the trainer's side before pulling ahead. The trainer continues to reward the dog for walking at the side. What training technique is being used here? A. Negative reinforcement. B. Shaping. C. Positive punishment. D. Extinction. Answer: B. Shaping. Explanation: this is an example of shaping. In shaping, the trainer reinforces successive approximations of the desired behavior. In this case, the trainer is rewarding the dog for walking in the correct position at the trainer's side and gradually increasing the criteria for reinforcement, walking for longer periods without pulling. Shaping is used to gradually mold behavior into its final form by reinforcing smaller steps that up to the desired outcome. Question 24. A dog is trained to sit when a treat is placed in front of it. Over time, the trainer starts to reduce the number of treats given, eventually giving a treat every third time the dog sits. What schedule of reinforcement is the trainer using here? A. Fixed interval. B. Variable ratio. C. Fixed ratio. D. Variable interval. Answer: C. Fixed ratio. Explanation: the trainer is using a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. In this schedule, reinforcement a treat is provided after a specific number of responses, in this case every third time the dog sits. Fixed ratio schedules tend to produce high rates of responding, as the dog knows that after a certain number of correct responses it will be rewarded. This schedule helps to reinforce the intermittently, making it more resistant to extinction. Question 25. A dog trainer is using a leash correction to stop a dog from jumping on people. Every time the dog attempts to jump, the trainer gives a quick tug on the leash, immediately followed by a verbal correction. After several repetitions, the dog begins to show avoidance behaviors and seems fearful of the trainer. What should the trainer do next? A. Continue with the same technique, as the dog will eventually stop jumping. B. Switch to a more positive reinforcement-based approach, rewarding calm behavior. C. Increase the intensity of the leash corrections to ensure the dog learns. D. Allow the dog to continue with the jumping behavior until it subsides. Answer: B. Switch to a more positive reinforcement-based approach, rewarding calm behavior. Explanation: the trainer should switch to a positive reinforcement-based approach. The dog's fear and avoidance behaviors suggest that the current method of using leash corrections may be causing stress and anxiety, which can hinder learning. Positive reinforcement encourages the desired behavior, in this case staying calm and not jumping, by rewarding the dog appropriate behavior. This method fosters a more trusting and effective training environment, while also minimizing the risk of creating fear-based responses. Question 26. Which of the following is an example of positive punishment in dog training? A. Giving a dog a treat for sitting on command. B. Withholding a treat when a dog fails to perform the desired behavior. C. Scolding a dog for chewing on furniture. D. Using a leash correction when a dog pulls on a leash. Answer: C. Scolding a dog for chewing on furniture. Explanation: positive punishment occurs when an unpleasant stimulus is introduced following an undesirable behavior, with the goal of decreasing the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. Scolding the dog for chewing on furniture is an example of positive punishment because the unpleasant stimulus, scolding, is added to discourage the behavior. In contrast, positive reinforcement would rewarding the dog for not chewing on the furniture, and negative reinforcement would involve removing an unpleasant stimulus when the dog stops chewing. Question 27. A dog trainer is working with a dog that exhibits resource guarding, where the dog growls and snaps when someone approaches its food bowl. The trainer decides to gradually desensitize the dog to the presence of people near its food by rewarding calm behavior when people approach, but without disturbing the dog's eating. This method is an example of A. Counter-conditioning, B. Shaping, C. Flooding, D. Classical conditioning. Answer: A. Counter-conditioning. Explanation: this is an example of counter-conditioning. In counter-conditioning, the trainer changes the dog's emotional response to a stimulus. In this case, people approaching its food bowl instead of feeling threatened or defensive. The dog is gradually taught to associate the presence of people with positive experiences, rewards. This helps to reduce the resource guarding behavior over time by altering the dog's emotional response to the trigger. Question 20, scenario-based. MS Davis has been working on training her dog Bella to stop barking excessively when someone rings the doorbell. Bella is able to remain quiet for short periods but starts barking loudly after a few minutes of silence. MS Davis finds it difficult to maintain Bella's attention during the training sessions. What strategy should MS Davis use to improve Bella's behavior? A. Punish Bella by scolding her every time she barks. B. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning, exposing Bella to the doorbell sound at low volume and rewarding her for calm behavior. C. Ignore Bella's barking and wait until it subsides. D. Increase the duration of the training sessions to wear Bella out. Answer. B. Use desensitization and counter-conditioning, exposing Bella to the doorbell sound at a low volume and rewarding her for calm behavior. Explanation. The most effective approach in this situation is desensitization and counter-conditioning. Desensitization involves gradually exposing the dog to the trigger, the doorbell sound, at a lower intensity, such as playing a recording at a lower volume and rewarding the dog for remaining calm. Counter-conditioning helps change Bella's emotional response to the doorbell, associating it with something positive rather than triggering barking. This gradual approach reduces the likelihood of her becoming overstimulated or anxious. Question 29. A dog trainer is working on teaching a dog to come when called. Initially, the dog responds immediately to the trainer's verbal cue, and the trainer rewards the dog with a treat. Over time, the trainer reduces the frequency of treats to every third successful response. What schedule of reinforcement is being used here? A. Variable ratio. B. Fixed interval. C. Fixed ratio. D. Variable interval. Answer. C. Fixed ratio. Explanation. This scenario describes a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, and this schedule reinforcement treats is provided after a specific number of responses. In this case, the trainer is rewarding the dog every third time it successfully comes when called. Fixed ratio schedules lead to a high rate of responding as the dog learns that a specific number of correct behaviors will result in a reward. Schedule helps to maintain behavior once it has been established. Question 30. When using clicker training, what is the most important factor for the success of the training? A. The timing of the click to mark the behavior. B. The type of treat used as a reward. C. The number of repetitions during the training session. D. The size of the dog and its breed. Answer A. The timing of the click to mark the behavior. Explanation. The most important factor in clicker training is the timing of the click. The click must occur at the precise moment the dog performs the desired behavior to effectively mark that behavior. This allows the dog to clearly understand which action is being reinforced. The treat is used as a secondary reinforcement that follows the click. Consistent and accurate timing helps to strengthen the association between the behavior and the reward, making the training more efficient.